Good evening, everybody. Thank you for introducing myself. So yeah, I am Bishara Obaid. I'm an assistant professor at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. And my field of research is actually on the Arab Christian literature and during the 9th till the 13th centuries, and its relationship with the Greek and ancient Greek and Syriac literature, and its impact in the dialogue between Muslims and Christians during the Abbasid Caliphate. As you see all, the topic of this the evening lecture is House of Wisdom, a meeting place for Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars and thinkers in the Abbasid Golden Age. Before starting to talk about this very important historical event, one must start by distinguishing two very important terms. First of all, there is today, unfortunately, an identification between Arabism and Islam. We should know that the Arabs and the Arabic heritage was before Islam, and Islam cannot be identified just with Arab and Arabs. So therefore, even if today we have a crisis among those who identify the Islam with Arabs, and they avoid to have in their identity the word Arab, because it is, as I said, identified with Islam. It is makes it very hard for finding for the Arabic culture and the Arabic, let's say it, heritage, to find its exact contribution in the global culture and heritage today. Well, we know that today we live all in a globalized world, and each culture, each heritage should find its contribution and should contribute with its rich history, rich culture, rich civilization. And therefore, my lecture today will focus on this historical moment when not just Muslim, but also Jewish and Christian scholars met and contributed to build what we call the Arab medieval culture and heritage and sciences, etc. That included all these things, in sciences, philosophy, and etc. This common heritage was not built from null. It was built on other heritages, other cultures that existed before the arrival of Islam and Muslims in the Middle East. What I mean about this? Well, first of all, let's say that before the Arabic and Islamic conquest of the Middle East, the Great Syria, the Mesopotamia, and even Egypt were centers of, were cultural centers, because they had lots of schools of philosophy, schools of sciences, and also school of law and theology. We cannot forget the important school of philosophy in Alexandria. We cannot forget the school of law in Beirut. We cannot forget the schools of Edessa and of Nisibis, and even some schools in Mesopotamia. The School of Medicine after the 6th century in the city of Jundia Basur. So students and scholars from all over the world, the known world at that time, were going to these schools to get knowledge. The language in Middle East at that time, the cultural language was mainly Greek because it was the koine, the lingua franca at that time. However, people used other languages for commercial and for their everyday life, like Syriac, Aramaic, Coptic, and other languages and dialects. So with the passage of time, mainly Syrians felt the necessity to translate the culture, the philosophical and scientific treatises and writings into Syriac. And it was during the 7th and the 6th and mainly the 7th century that the translating movement, or the first translating movement from Greek into Syriac, that had place. So we had the translations in fields like medicine, mathematics, philosophy. So for example, actually the works of Hippocrates, the works of Galenus were translated from Greek into Syriac. Almost all the works of Aristotle, Plato, and the Neoplatonism were also translated. And we have lots of names that were very famous at that time, like Sergius from Ras Aina. Also, we can mention the figure of Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who was from Al-Hira in Mesopotamia. So this first step was to enrich the Syriac language with the Greek and ancient Greek, which was at that time universal, and making Syriac language a cultural and philosophical and scientific language. But suddenly, something happened in the Peninsula Arabica. In fact, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, was born in 570. He started his to preach Islam in 610, and he immigrated to the Medina 622. Very early, he could, it was the first time in the history, he could unify all the Arab tribes under one power and under one religion, which was Islam. The Prophet died on 632. Exactly after his death, the first caliphs could conquest the Middle East and the provinces, the Oriental provinces of Byzantine. So we know that Jerusalem was conquered on 636. Damascus and also Iran were conquered at that time. In 638, all the lands of Mesopotamia started to be conquered, and and it's finished when with the second caliph at 641. And at the same time, the Islamic army could conquest the Alexandria and Egypt during the 639 and 641. So just 10 to 15 years after the death of the Prophet of Islam, Muslims and the new religion conquered the Middle East. Before and during the conquest, we can say that the Arabs who were living in the Peninsula Arabica did not have a civilization or a culture. ended in Arabic language, there was two terms very distinct between them. The first term was Hadar, and the second Bedouins. From the first term, the root Hadar, we have the word Hadara, which means culture or civilization. And in Arabic, we don't have the Hadara Badawiya, the civilization of Bedouins, for one reason, because for the word Hadar meant for Arabs, the people who live in cities. And even if we had some cities in the Peninsula Arabica at that time, like Mecca or the Medina, which was Yathrib, At-Ta'if, etc., seems that they did not have the same culture and civilization as it was in the other cities, the great cities of the Middle East, like Damascus, Jerusalem, Alexandria, etc. Therefore, when the Arabs met the civilized world after the conquest, they were amazed from all this, from archaeology. They were amazed from the cathedrals, from the palaces, from the organization of the cities. And therefore, they started to wonder about the reasons for which this civilization were that amazing. So they noticed that the main reason is the sciences and the instruments that people, the local people, were using into their organization, administration, etc. Therefore, the caliphs were the first to ask to make a transition from the local civilization and to enrich the Arabic civilization. The first step was to use the local people in their administration and to learn from them how to take they themselves all the positions. So we can start to talk about the transition or the transformation of the Arabic language from language of Bedouins into cultural language. Well, I can give like some examples that in the Arabic language, some terms were when the Arabic language started to be a cultural language, adopted and brand some terms from the local languages. For example, the Arabs did not have paper, so they used the word qirtas, which is from the Greek chartis. Arabs, the Bedouins, did not have tables, so we can see that in the Arabic first manuscripts, we have the words like tawila, which from the Latin table, tavula. And for example, in some Egyptian manuscripts, we can see the word tarapeza, which is from the Greek trapeza. In the Iraqian manuscripts, we see the word khiwan, which is from the Persian word that meant table. So this was like some examples how the Arabic language started to use terms and expressions from the local, which were also foreign languages and cultures for it, and to enrich it and to become slowly, step by step, a cultural language. The second step was to ask to translate all the sciences and all the ancient treasure from Greek and Syriac into Arabic. This movement, which is the translating movement second, had two moments. The first moment was the translations from Syriac, from the already Syriac translated works into Arabic. These translations were not very exact, and were mostly literal. But from the beginning of from the middle of the 9th century, so we are now in the Abbasid period, we have the second moment of translation, which was based on the Greek original through also some Syriac translations into Arabic. This started with the school of the Christian Nestorian scholar, who was called Ishaq, Hanin ibn Ishaq, who died, Hunayn ibn Ishaq died in 873 in Baghdad. So he had some students, and they worked into translating these works from Arabic. It is said that Hunayn was reading the Arabic translation twice, controlling it with the original Greek and Syriac, and improving it so the Arabic text, the produced Arabic text, would be comprehensible and as possible as faithful to the original Greek. So we can say that 29 of the wisdom of that time was translated into Arabic. So it was not just philosophy, it was also mathematics, medicine, and other sciences. One of the most distinct and important examples is Qusta ibn Luqa. He was from Baalbek, but he lived in Baghdad. He was a doctor, but at that time, no one had just one field of knowledge. So he studied philosophy, astrology, mathematics, and other sciences, even literature and poetry. So Qusta ibn Luqa had, on the request of the Caliph, translated some works in mechanics, because this field was very important for the Caliphs to improve and develop some ways to be used in their wars, instruments to be used in the wars. So Qusta composed a treatise that was called Al-Maraya al-Muhriqa, the mirrors that set fire. So this work was very essential because Arabs could create that instruments through which they could send fire to the army of the enemies. In addition, as I said, Qusta ibn Luqa was a doctor. And once a vizier wanted to go from Baghdad to Mecca and to make the pilgrim, that is the Hajj. And he asked Qusta ibn Luqa to be his private doctor during this time, during the pilgrimage. So Qusta ibn Luqa apologized and said that for reasons with and problems in his family, he could not go with a vizier. However, he composed the first scientific article, the first scientific treatise that included advices to the people who go to pilgrim, so they can prevent their their health, and if something happened to them, what they should do, if they feel tiredness, what they should do, etc., etc. So we are now talking exactly about the period that we call the golden period of the Abbasid dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate, which was characterized by the House of Wisdom. What does it mean, House of Wisdom, or Bayt al-Hikmah? It was a place, let's say it, of encounter between scholars of different religions, different fields of scientific fields and sciences, and philosophy, theology, etc. It was founded by the Caliph, the Abbasid Caliph, Harun al-Rashid, and there we had a very huge library where was gathered a lot of manuscripts of different sciences and of different periods. For example, the same Caliph asked the emperor of Byzantium at that time to send to him the famous mathematic at that time, who was called Leontios the mathematic. The emperor refused, but he copied two manuscripts that included the whole work of Leontios the mathematics, and he sent this manuscripts to the Caliph, and these manuscripts were preserved in the House of Wisdom. The House of Wisdom was not just a place of encounter. It was also like a university, like a school. And it became also an example of other schools, mainly at the beginning in Baghdad and then in the whole Muslim empire. The beginnings were with the commentaries. So scholars started to comment on the Arabic translations of different sciences, of different fields, of different authors and philosophers, and we're discussing a lot of issues together, and had encounters sometimes in front of the Caliph, or sometimes by the will of the Caliph. And as I said, the Arabic, the House of Wisdom was transformed into an example for other schools. And we know that in Baghdad, there was other schools and circles of scholars. The most important one, if I may say, was the peripatetic, or the circle of peripatetics, the circle of the Aristotelian scholars of Baghdad, who was founded by the Christian Aristotelian philosopher Ibn Bishr, Matta Ibn Bishr. And in fact, this school or this circle was behind the creation of what we call the Arabic Aristotle. Why I'm underlining this? Because this circle tried to retranslate the whole corpus of Aristotle into Arabic, a new translation, correct translation. And because of this translations of the corpus of Aristotle, the Westerns, after the Crusades, they knew Aristotle, and we have some works that are not preserved into Greek original, but just an Arabic translation, and from this Arabic translation into Latin translation. In this circle, we have lots of figures, very important figures, like, for example, the second Aristotle, or the Arab Aristotle, who was called Al-Farabi. He was Muslim scholar. He was a student of the founder of this circle, Ibn Bishr. And after the death of Ibn Bishr, Al-Farabi took the direction and the presidents of this non-institutional school. Al-Farabi, as I said, is a very important figure in the history of philosophy. He was called the second Aristotle or the new Aristotle, and he composed, besides the translations he made of Aristotle and the commentaries on Aristotle, he also composed lots of works, philosophical works mainly, and he commented some of the works of Aristotle. One of the most important, so he was Muslim, a student of a Christian, and after him, the director of the school were passed to a Christian scholar who was called Yahya ibn Adi. And Yahya ibn Adi also is a very important figure because he was the one of those who not just copied Arabic translations copied very manuscripts of these translations of Aristotle and the Neoplatonic treatises, etc. He also composed a lot of works, and in very, very different fields, in ethics, in philosophy, in theology, interreligious dialogues. And we can say that he also wrote something in mathematics. If I don't want to forget the important figure of Yahya ibn Adi. And among his students, we have four Christians and 6 Muslims. And we know that other Jewish also scholars frequented this school and other schools in Baghdad. So with the work of these schools, the House of Wisdom, the School of the Aristotelians in Baghdad, the School of Medicine in Jandialspur, and other centers, we can see that it was the birth of what we call the universal Arabic literature, the universal Arabic cultures, which was not just common for Jewish and Christian and Muslims, it was also it was universal because it was very important, as we will see also for the Western world. After, for example, after the direction of Yahya ibn Adi, we have also directions of, in that school, we have also, and in other schools, the Muslims took, for example, they were, yes, the director of some of the schools. Other times they were Jewish, other times they were Christians. And when the demographic situation changed and the majority of the population was Muslim, it was very natural to see that those who directed these schools were mainly Muslims. So when the Crusades were arrived to the area, and they saw this important work that has been done by the Arabs, the Jewish, the Christian, and the Muslim, and what I call the Arabic heritage, the Arabic literature in all the fields, they decided to make the Arabic language as one of the most the obligatory languages for studies in their universities, like in the University of Bologna or in the Sorbonne in Paris, etc. Arabic language became obligatory for those who wanted to study at the universities. And this was because of the important common heritage the Arabic language and the Arabic culture produced. So we can say that from Baghdad, the example was diffused in all the Islamic and Arab Caliphate, Arab Empire. We can see the important schools in Egypt and in the north of Syria. And what is interesting in all this, that even if the majority of the scholars became from one moment Muslims, we cannot forget that the excellency was for some people that they were coming from different religions. I will explain myself that saying that we know that in mathematics, the most important scholars were from the Sabaeans, because they, in mathematics and astrology, because they, in their religion, these sciences were very important. For medicine, we know that the most important scholars of medicine were Jews. To give another example, we know that Abu Umran Musa bin Maymun, who was from Spain, from Cordoba. He was born in Cordoba in the second millennium, in 1135. We know that he got a refugee in Cairo by Salah ad-Din, and he became his private doctor. In addition, we know that he composed a very important treatise and writings in medicine, and he composed them in Arabic language. So I talked previously how the Arabic language, in the first steps into becoming a cultural language, used or transliterated or adopted terms, expressions, and concepts from the other languages. So what happens when the Arabic language became a cultural language and a scientific language? So we see that other languages started to adopt and to transliterate Arabic concepts, Arabic expressions, and Arabic terms, because in this language, some sciences had developed very importantly. For example, we know in Latin, the term algorithm, it was the name of Al-Khwarizmi, who was one of the most important, Muhammad Musa al-Khwarizmi, who died in 849, and he was one of the important scholars of mathematics. For example, we know that the Arabs discovered the zero. So in Latin, we have cifra from the Arabic sifr. The Arabic numbers were also given to the Latin and Western languages. We'll give another example, alchemia, which is from Arabic alchemia, chemistry. So all this indicates that from non-cultural language, it became a cultural and scientific language. Unfortunately, this golden age had a deadline. When Baghdad was conquered by the Mongol, we know that the centers of science and of knowledge were also moved to Qahira to the Cairo under the Fatimids. And we have also the Ayyubids, who also were favorable of knowledge, and other dynasties and other kingdoms. However, when we had the appearance of a new genre of literature, which indicates for us that the decadence started from the 15th century. I mean, the appearance of the encyclopedia. In fact, when you don't have an originality in your knowledge, you will make a summary of the past. And this was the period of encyclopedias. Yes, they were important, but they did not give anything new. They just give a summary of what was developed and what was discovered and what was done in the previous generations. So, for example, we have Ibn Khaldun, the very important philosopher of history and sociologist, even before the birth of the sociology. We have also one another important figure, As-Suyuti from Egypt, who composed encyclopedias of different sciences, even of literature, of linguistics, the commentary on the Quran, philosophy, etc. So with this kind of, or with this genre of literature, we have the beginning of the decadence and of the Arabic, let's say, cultural literature and civilization, which also started to be dead with the, or yes, I'm not exaggerating, with the, or under the Ottomans and under the Ottoman Empire. Well, I would like now to conclude this general lecture about the importance of the Arab literature and in the whole, in all the scientific fields. I would like to conclude with some readings from two writings. The one from the period of the Abbasid Caliphate, from the very golden age, which was written by the Metropolitan of Nisibis, Ilyas. And this work was entitled The Useful Wisdoms for the Body and the Soul. Ilyas of Nisibis was a very important figure at during the 11th century. Actually, he was one of the authors of my first doctorate dissertation, and I studied him very, very well. He was one of my heroes during my studies. And being in Ramadan period, I choose to read these wisdoms that he gave to his the one who asked him to write this this work. So how one can keep his body and his soul pure. I choose some of those, and I would like to read them for you. That God should be your first and last thought. Justice consists in giving each one what is due to him. Health is our best asset. Health is a known good, which is appreciated only when it is lost. God rewards one according to his good or bad deeds. Keep the law, and the law will keep you. Look for the wealth that does not perish, the immutable life, and the goods that do not disappear. The tranquility of the soul does not agree with sin. Little nourishment gives the body rest. If you desire perfection, keep your soul away from everything that can deface it. Mercy is the foundation of the fear of God. Taking 2 meals in a row is bad for your health. Do not eat before you are hungry, and do not drink before you are thirsty. Virtues are initially bitter, but they end up being sweet. Vices are sweet at the beginning, bitter at the end. Examine your conscience every night before falling asleep, and verify the good and the evil things you have done during the day. The vigor of the body does not depend on the large quantity of foods, but on their assimilation. Neither glory nor wealth does consist in what disappears. To enlighten your soul, close your eyes to all things that has no profit to it. Be ashamed of yourself before you are ashamed of others. Try to correct yourself before correcting others. The second work I choose for you tonight to read with you is a mystical commentary on the Song of Songs, which was composed by David, or was found in the hand of David Maimonides II during the 15th century. So we are going to another period, a period before the decadence. And what we need to know that from the 12th century onwards, the influence of Arabic Neoplatonism, the Sufism, and the Islamic mysticism, and also the Christian mysticism, penetrated Jewish biblical exegesis, bringing in its fold a new emphasis on the importance of the individual. The Song of Solomon was henceforth portrayed as a dialogue between God and the individual soul of man. So the first part is a commentary on the verse, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and by the hens of the field. This is, says the commentary, in oath, the soul addresses to the sages of Israel and the seekers of the Lord, imploring them not to proceed in divulging the truth of love, the nature of its essence, and what it entails both for the lover and the beloved in the absence of preliminary preparation and until its time has come. The reason for which this oath is made on the gazelles and hens is that the wisdom of this allegory hints that the gazelles are the great sages and the hens are the prophets. The oath is addressed by the disciples to their masters and vice versa, but by the disciples in order for their masters to show restraint, and by the masters in order that the disciples be steadfast in their restraint. The expression until it please is an allusion to such time as initiation is completed on the part of the aspirant in relation to his goal. It is also plausible to say that the oath on the gazelles or the hens is on account of their dwelling permanently in the desert, and that the people of love, Ahlul Mahabbati, often repair to the wilderness. The beloved began to explain the disappearance of the obstacles which had delayed the soul from the obtaining of perfection and its ascension toward its supernal word. The intellect exclaims, the time of ignorance is past, and the impediments of custom and habit have melted, and the low forms have all been effaced and substituted by virtues. This is the meaning of the verse, the winter is past. The sky is clear, the night moonlit, and the stars of speculation are shining. The rain has gone, and there is now to hinder thee from the traversing the stations, rending the vials, and removing all obstacles. And commenting the verse, I am come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. Eat, O friends, yeah, drink abundantly. The commentary says, the intellect exclaims, I entered my garden, signifying thereby that I have been united with the soul and the soul with me. She has acted with me with the noblest virtue, and there exalt from me the most fragrant recollection, the sincerest outcome, and the most blissful delight. Eat then from this table, O brethren of truth, and drink of the beverages of its gnosis. And with this, I would like to thank you for following this very general lecture, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you have any question, I will try to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bishara. There is a question here, and later we can open microphones for people to ask anything further if they have any more questions. So your field focus is mainly on Arab Christian literature. Can you tell us what your current research, how that can be related to what we're discussing this evening?
Yeah, at the moment I am in part in in an European Research Council project, which called Florilegia Syriaca, which is consists into the transmission of the Syriac treasure and knowledge from Greek into Arabic. So we are at this moment we are studying some manuscripts from the British Library, Christian Syriac manuscripts, and they are patristic manuscripts. So we are trying to identify the Greek background of this manuscripts, of the content of this manuscripts, and how they were used from Arab Christian authors, and then how this manuscripts or these works were also involved in the interreligious dialogue between Arab Christian scholars and Muslim scholars at that period. So this is now, and we are talking about the golden age of the Abbasid period, when the center of the Christians, let's say it, theological schools were at Tikrit and Baghdad. So we have in Iraq two main centers that were involved into this project of the transition of the knowledge from Syriac and then into Arabic.
Thank you very much. Aaron requested that we try to provide the two summary documents that you read at the end. Is there any way you can reshare the source or where people can find them?
So the commentary, I can also send after the book that produced the English translation of this commentary. Unfortunately, the first work was translated by myself from Arabic, so there is in Arabic with Italian and French translation of this work. And if you don't mind, I can also share the details after, because I have it in my laptop and I can find it. And maybe you can contact the library and they can send you the, or you can contact me directly to my email, and I can send you the these two references.
Thank you, Doctor. Could you possibly type your email into the chat room so people could contact you? I will open microphones now for people in the panelist room so that they can ask any further questions or just say thank you. If anyone in the attendee room would like to move over and open their microphone, just raise your hand and I'll be happy to move you into the panelist room. Thank you all for being with us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Bishara Obaid.
You're welcome.
Thank you all once again, and Ramadan Kareem. Microphones are open.
Hey, this is Edgar. What eventually happened to the House of Wisdom, and also about the some of the original manuscripts? Are they still around?
No, everything was destroyed when Baghdad was destroyed. Yeah, we know that when the Mongols conquered Baghdad and destroyed it, they destroyed everything. And this very important, huge library was destroyed. Actually, some of the copies of these manuscripts, because manuscript, like I mentioned in the lecture, Yahya ibn Ali, who was working as a copist in the market of copists. So in Baghdad, there was a market of copists, and the majority of these manuscripts of this work were copied and were sent to other centers. And for this reason, we have copies of them. But the manuscripts in the schools of Baghdad, they were all managed. So destroyed it, and we did not have anything from the period of the Golden Age of Baghdad, unfortunately. But after that, yes, we have a lot. It's like the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. The same thing happened, and everything was destroyed, and the knowledge that was like gathered in that library was disappeared.
Yes, Alexander, you have a question?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the presentation. Actually, I have one question and I think 3 comments. May I start with the last comment concerning the question about the fate of the House of Wisdom, because as a Mamluk studies scholar, I can say that a lot of scholars managed to flee to Cairo. Unfortunately, we don't know too much about the intellectual life of the Egypt. It's a field for further studies, but generally can say it was much richer than it was considered before. So more or less way was continued in Egypt and Syria during the Mamluk reign. And my question is concerning your statement about Sabaeans, Jewish. So you say that Sabaeans were famous in astrology and mathematics, and Jewish were famous in medicine, which is quite a common spread stereotype. But for example, if you ask a person from like Eastern Europe who studied in Russia or somewhere about was very famous in medicine, they will definitely name you Avicenne. It's not only from Russian. So the question is there any statistical approach, is any statistical analysis about like the ethnic or religious origin of the scholars, or we just continuation of the stereotypes quite common in the medieval original literature? And my last comment will be about your statements about culture. Yes, actually, Hadara and Badawi, they're antonyms, but there are other words for culture in the Arabic language. Thaqafa, Turat, should be mentioned. And I think that we should be more cautious about evaluation of the cultural influence and cultural development, because new studies show that the Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula actually they have much more intensive contacts with the Roman Empire, with the Byzantine Empire, with Iran. So I think it also should be a field for further studies. But thank you very much for interesting presentation. I enjoyed it. And the National Library of Israel for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much for your comments and observations. Well, actually, when I was asked to make a lecture, I chose to make it very general lecture. So I did not go to a specified detail. Let's start with the last comment about Hadara and Hadar. Yes, we know that there were contacts between some tribes of the Arabian Peninsula with the Byzantine Empire and with also the Persian Empire. But when I was talking about the Hadar and the Hadara, we cannot say that all the tribes had this contacts, and they were just very few tribes. We know that also they were located very near to the border with the Byzantines and with the Persians, and we do not have actually a real cities for them or a real centers, even if we had letters written by the other side of the map, so from people from Persia or people from Mesopotamia or from Byzantine to those in Arabia, but we don't have the answers, and we don't have any remains. What we have just some inscriptions and some on rocks. So our knowledge about the civilization in Arabia is very limited. And we know, in fact, that there were also kingdoms in the south of Arabia, in Najran, for example, but we don't have a lot of knowledge about this. So when I was saying that the Hadar and the Hadara, I mainly meant the center of the Arabian Peninsula, that means Mecca and the tribes around Mecca, from where Islam was born. So this is for the last comment. For the statistics, etc. Yeah, it was very general statement about the Sabaeans and the scholars of medicine. Well, the most important and the most famous scholar of medicine is Ibn Sina, and he was Muslim and Persian. So we are talking about the centers and the most involved scholars and the teachers, and not the most famous figures and those who make something new in these fields. So as numbers, yes, we can say that the number of the scholars of medicine were at the beginning more Jewish, and after the demographic change, we have more Muslims. The same with the astrologers and other sciences. So the beginnings were the numbers were of other confessions and religions, scholars of other confessions and religions, and after that, after the 11th and 12th century, we have mainly Muslim scholars. But this does not mean that also during the first period, we had a distinct Muslim figures. I have said that Al-Farabi, yes, he studied by Ibn Bishr Matta, and he had a Christian student, Yahya ibn Adi, but he was the one who was called the second Aristotle, and or the new Aristotle. So even if his teachers and his students were Christians, he was the one that was called the new Aristotle.
Thank you very much. Yehoshua, you had a question?
Yes, I do. First of all, thank you very much, Dottore, for your presentation. I was very taken in the very beginning where you made a differentiation between, for lack of a better word, Arabism and Islam. So you've made a differentiation between the two. Whereas, to what extent in our period of time now can we really make that distinction? Is there still a distinction, or because of the ascendancy of Islam as a force, is that now putting the cultural element into the shadows?
Well, I will answer by an experience. So I live in Europe since 15 years, and when I say that there are Arab Christians, people in Europe will say when they were converted into Christianity. So unfortunately, in Europe, there is a identification between Islam and Arabs. When you say Arab, the first thing that they will think about is Islam and Muslims. They don't know about the existence of Arab Christians or of Jew Arabs and their contribution to the Arabic culture and civilization in the past and also today. So this is also one of the reasons of the crisis among, I can say it, among the Christians in the Middle East, that they started to create from the 19th century to create national identities. So yeah, we have this national identities that were also connected in some way with the churches and the confessions. For example, the church, the Nestorian or the Church of the East in Iraq was connected with the Assyrians, other church with the Chaldeans, other church with the Copts, and there was a refusal to be connected with the word Arabic, because the word Arabic was very identified with Islam.
Thank you very, very much once again, Dr. Bishara Obaid. Thank you all for being here with us this evening. Laila Tov from Jerusalem and Ramadan Kareem.
Laila Tov, Ramadan Kareem. Bye. Thank you. Thank you all.
Ramadan Kareem. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.